Following yesterday's appeal court decision to release David Ryan James, BBC One is now showing the Rough Justice programme, which revealed the evidence that led to the end of a 3-year ordeal.
This is the story of a vet, Ryan James, his lover and his wife. Ryan James's practice was in the countryside around Burton-on-Trent. He was popular with his clients and was widely regarded as the best equine vet in the area. Ryan James's wife Sandra was devoted to him and to their 3 young children. Her family was her life, and she basked in the status of wife of the local vet. She was very definitely Mrs. James.
She was the woman of many parts, was Sandra. She was strong, she was brave, she was courageous, she wasn't ashamed to say what she thought. She could be obsessive when she was determined to do something. Nothing stood in Sandra's way. She chose her goals and she went for them.
Sandra was not, however, the first Mrs. James. 11 years earlier, Ryan had left his first wife after he and Sandra began an affair. They'd met when he'd put down a horse she owned. Sandra and Ryan shared a love of horses. They'd bought some land outside Burton and were planning to build a house and start an Arabian stud farm.
As a couple, they appeared a normal, happy couple. If anything, they were the perfect couple. They never argued at all.
But on the 13th of January 1994, everything changed.
BT Sheffield connecting 0283 66298.
66298?
Yeah,
Ambulance, can I help you?
I don't know. It's too late.
Sorry?
I don't know. I just found my wife dead in bed.
That same evening, a post-mortem was carried out at Burton Hospital to establish the cause of death. Sandra James's body had a cocktail of veterinary drugs. The one that had killed her was Immobilon, a horse tranquilizer 1,000 times more powerful than morphine. But was it murder or suicide? 3 months later, the Staffordshire police thought they had the answer.
Since the death of your wife, we've been making a lot of inquiries. Also, many tests have been carried out. As a result of those inquiries and of those tests, I'm arresting you for the murder of your wife, Sandra James, on the night of the 12th to 13th of January, 1994. You do not have to say anything unless you wish to do so, but what you say may be given in evidence.
Never. I did not expect anything like this.
You'll have to accompany us to the police station.
Can I just be given a few seconds?
The police had good reason to suspect Ryan James. The drug that had killed Sandra, Immobilon, was only available to vets. And when the police investigated the events leading up to her death, they became convinced they'd found a compelling motive. The oldest one in the book. Far from being the perfect couple, the previous September, some of Sandra's friends had learned that all was not well.
Sandra, what's the matter?
I can't tell you. I'll talk to you sometime. Oh, I can't. Ryan's having an affair with Catherine Crooks. He told me on Thursday. He can have the children go off with Catherine. They'll be better off with Ryan. I can't cope with it all. There's no point in my living anymore. It's not Ryan's fault. Oh, he's ill.
Shortly afterwards, Ryan left his wife and children and moved into a bungalow with Catherine. But after 7 weeks, Ryan was back. The lease on the bungalow had run out. The police said Ryan was in debt and suspected that he'd killed his wife to cash in her life insurance to make a new life for him and Catherine.
He's only come back because of the children and because he's got nowhere else to go. He's moved back for all the wrong reasons. He says he's got no intention of giving Catherine up. He's made no effort to try to rebuild the marriage.
Ladies, would you like to look at this month's special offer?
Right, what would you like to drink?
I'll have a lemonade and lime.
Okay.
The prosecution said that Ryan had planned Sandra's death well in advance and that he began to poison her in the week before Christmas.
Can you put on the tab? Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ryan had told Sandra he would be definitely moving out on Christmas Eve. On Tuesday, the 21st of December, they agreed to have a meal out together.
You said cider, didn't you?
No.
She said that when she and Ryan had gone out on Tuesday evening, Ryan had pressurised her into having a drink of cider when she'd asked for a soft drink.
I suppose it's Christmas. Cheers.
Cheers.
Looking back, Sandra James's friends said that evening was the point at which they noticed a marked change in her.
Do you want some more in there? Yeah. Oh, you're going to go pop, you.
Sandra's friends told the police she seemed particularly odd at a children's party a few days later.
At about 4 p.m, when the party was breaking up, I saw Ryan come in with Sandra. My initial thought was that Sandra looked like a zombie and wasn't aware of what was going on around her. Ryan sat her in a chair as though she couldn't have managed it on her own.
Watch her, look at her, she's going to fall over.
What's the matter with her? What's she taken?
I don't know what she's taken.
She ought to see a doctor.
She doesn't want to.
It doesn't matter what she wants, you should call one anyway.
I had to take her to Sainsbury's in Derby. There's no food in the house.
Dad!
Yeah? Hey, that's good.
Come on, have you got your coats? I rang Sandra on Friday morning and asked her if she was better. She said,
Bit better. Why, did I talk to you yesterday?
I saw you yesterday at the stables party.
Did you? Oh, what day is it?
Friday.
Friday? Well, what else have I been doing? Do you know, I can't remember anything about yesterday or the day before at all.
This period just before Christmas was to become known as the 2 lost days.
By this time, I'd become really worried about her welfare and thought that Ryan might be doing something to her to make it appear that she wasn't fit to have the children.
Helen Cleaver arranged for Sandra to get away from Ryan after Christmas.
Oh, hello. It's Helen Cleaver.
Christmas in the James household was a sad and tense time. Ryan did not, after all, move out. There was a terrible atmosphere, said a friend. On the 27th of December, Sandra and the children went to stay with her brother in Rochdale. The police claimed that once away from Ryan, Sandra recovered physically. And on her return home, her friends said they were stunned by the change in her.
While I was away, I decided to make a list of the questions to ask Ryan. Well, my family wanted me to leave him, but I insisted on coming back. I decided that if Ryan refused to answer or didn't answer any of the questions in the way I wanted, I was going to divorce him. Ryan answered the questions in the way I wanted. He said things I thought I'd never hear again. We're going to make a new start. He told me he hasn't seen Catherine for 3 weeks. It's all finished.
Certainly Sandra seemed hopeful of the future, at least outwardly. 3 days before she died, she advertised locally for a family house to rent. They'd sold their house and she said they were waiting for a new one to be built. But the prosecution claimed that as far as Ryan was concerned, his affair with Catherine was far from over.
Right, come on then. Let's get your coat off.
At the same time, physically, Sandra began to go downhill again. Her friends told the police about several incidents which, with hindsight, they thought significant. For example, Ryan was treating her for a chest infection.
How do you want? Do you want a coffee?
That will be lovely, thanks.
Right, yeah.
Come on, Beth, here we go.
So, how are you, Sandra?
Oh, not bad.
I've had an awful taste in my mouth. Ryan gave me something from the surgery. I've taken it, but I don't trust him. Oh, come on, Sandra, he's your husband. Yes, but I just don't trust him.
Right. We talked about general things, but a couple of times she seemed to lose the thread of the conversation, and I thought that she wasn't really concentrating. She didn't drink the coffee I made her, but as she was holding the cup, I noticed that her hand was shaking slightly.
2 days before she died, Sandra rang Helen Cleaver and asked her to help her babysit because she felt so ill. It was the last time anyone, other than her husband and children, saw Sandra James alive.
She didn't look well. She was cold and huddled up and her eyes were dark.
How are you feeling? I'm dizzy. My head feels like it's bursting.
When she got up, she looked as though all her body was aching.
From then until her death, none of Sandra's friends spoke to her. Ryan wouldn't put through their telephone calls, saying Sandra was sleeping all the time. He told them he'd had to help her to the lavatory because she was so groggy. When they urged him to get a doctor, he said she didn't want one. The evening before Sandra died, a friend saw Ryan at the children's swimming lesson.
How's Sandra?
She's sleeping a lot.
Can I go and see her?
She won't answer the door. She's in bed.
Has she got a cold, flu?
It's nothing.
Can I phone Sandra?
She won't answer it.
Have you called the doctor?
She won't let me.
In court, the prosecution claimed that Ryan was reluctant to let people visit Sandra or speak to her on the phone because he was already drugging her with phenobarbital. That night, sometime between midnight and 7 a.m., Sandra James died. The following morning, when the police were called, they concluded that if this was suicide, it was a very strange suicide indeed. Not only was there no note, there were no obvious clues as to how Sandra James had killed herself. The police doctor who came to certify her as dead noticed the phone had been unplugged. And the police said that although they couldn't put their finger on it, there was something odd about Ryan's reaction in the immediate aftermath of his wife's death. When the pathologist, Helen Whitwell, examined Sandra James's body, she found evidence which, to her trained eye, suggested murder.
I think you'd better come and have a look at this. Yeah.
A total of 6 or 7 puncture marks were found in Sandra James's feet.
It's right near the vein here, and here, and here. That indicates a certain amount of skill. 4 marks there, you've got that down, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah. 2 there.
On her right hand, there were 2 puncture marks and a large area of bruising. There was also an abrasion on the inside of her upper lip. The post-mortem also found that Sandra James had a quantity of orange liquid in her stomach. It was this which contained the immobilon which had killed her. Her stomach and blood also showed she'd taken phenobarbital, a powerful tranquilizer used primarily by vets. A puzzling twist was the presence in her urine of Revivon, the antidote to immobilon. To the Staffordshire police, there was only one conclusion.
You, Ryan, killed her.
I did not. So help me God, I didn't. That is the last last thing I wanted, I did not do it. I can't put it more calmly and logically than I had no part in it. Other than trying to protect her too much by not getting a doctor. But people who wanted me to get a doctor only had my story that she was able to go on. They hadn't seen her. She was tired. I've really... I've lost my wife. I didn't kill her. I've got 3 children. I deprived them of their mother. There's no way. I know a little bit about toxicology. I know things can be detected.
I hear what you say, Ryan, but at the end of the day, every explanation that you've given, well, many of them are contrary to other evidence that we have. Other explanations and other things that people have said about what you did, what you said to Sandra.
Sandra's been, I won't say spreading the word, but she's given her version of events to a multitude of people. And I have to stand here on my own with one story against a multitude of similar stories that have come about through them talking to Sandra. I'm like a soloist trying to out-sing a choir. And the choir's singing a different song. They're all singing together.
I'm with you. I agree. You are like a soloist trying to out-sing a choir.
In court, the prosecution presented the case as a carefully planned, ruthless murder. And the message they sought to convey to the jury was that Ryan James had both the motive and the means to murder his wife in a variety of ways.
This was a planned killing by you, not her.
No.
In which you fetched the phenobarbital from this secure place in the surgery to which you had daily access?
Yes.
In which you fetched the Revivon and Immobilon from your secure store to which you had daily access?
Yes.
You drugged her, first with phenobarbital.
No.
Maybe you thought it would kill her, but it didn't.
I did nothing of the kind.
Then you set about with your skill injecting her.
No.
In what order doesn't matter for our purposes, but something went wrong. Which is why she had Revivon in her. Were you disturbed?
I was asleep.
With regard to the injections, in your interviews, you made reference to injections for a different purpose, didn't you?
Sorry?
Injecting air. To cause coronary arrest or embolism.
Yes.
There are any number of reasons for those multitude, 8 or 9 injections, potentially, aren't there?
You go in the realms of something pretty exotic.
Then she's got the mark in the top of her lip.
I've seen a photograph of it.
And within 3 weeks of being so shocked, your mistress had moved in.
I had 3 children to look after.
Part of the plan. You can sigh as much as you'd like.
Absolute
You
nonsense.
wanted her dead.
No.
You set about slowly but surely killing her.
No.
And you tried to make it look like suicide.
No.
The prosecution's case was that Ryan had first poisoned Sandra with phenobarbital. After she'd run out of antibiotics she'd been prescribed for a chest infection, Ryan gave her some more from his surgery, substituting phenobarbital in the capsules. A forensic expert for the Crown said that the level of phenobarbital in Sandra James's blood, 44 micrograms per milliliter of blood, was very high.
Now, somebody not tolerant at that level is likely to be asleep at least, or possibly even in a coma. They may simply be lying down, but they would certainly not appear normal.
The Crown claimed that forensic analysis of Sandra's hair showed 2 distinct periods when phenobarbital had been taken.
Putting it in common parlance, just before Christmas, there is a smaller amount of phenobarbital.
Yes.
Then there is very little or none taken in the next period after Christmas.
Yes.
Then, in the few days before death, there was quite a lot taken.
There is considerably more taken, yes.
What is the effect of alcohol on phenobarbital?
Anyone taking phenobarbital would show considerably marked clinical problems if they took alcohol on top of that.
The prosecution said this explained the suspicion of Sandra's friends about the 2 lost days before Christmas. She'd been poisoned by phenobarbital, its effect exacerbated by the cider Ryan had made her drink. The poisoning had stopped when Sandra had gone away, which explained her improvement, and had begun again when she returned home, which explained her decline. Having ensured over a number of days that the phenobarbital had made Sandra James sufficiently drowsy, the prosecution say Ryan then injected her with immobilon. The pathologist said the injections had been made within 12 hours of her death by an expert.
People generally require knowledge and training to actually get into a blood vessel. So highly trained doctors, some nurses, and other people trained would have the knowledge. All of the injection sites that I found were near blood vessels and in fact looked as though they were skillfully performed.
The prosecution maintained that after injecting his wife with immobilon, Ryan had second thoughts and brought her round by injecting her with the antidote Revivon. They claim he then changed his mind and decided to go through with the murder. He drove to his surgery for a second batch of immobilon from the locked dangerous drugs cupboard. The noise of his visit at 4:10 a.m. woke the surgery's receptionist, who slept in the flat above.
The first bang I heard was the outside door. The second bang I heard would be someone going into where the drugs were kept.
You assumed it was a vet?
Yes.
Why do you say that?
Vets never close doors. They just open, they just bang.
Did you hear whoever it was go away again?
Yes. And that was when I got out of bed to see who it was. I looked through my bedroom window.
Can you describe the car to us?
Only that it was a dark colour.
Did you see whoever was driving it?
No. Well, I couldn't, no.
How quickly did it drive away?
Oh, very, very fast. Very, very fast.
Did you see the car get to the bottom of the drive?
Yes.
Which way did it go?
He turned left.
The prosecution said the driver had to be Ryan because he was the only vet who lived in that direction, and Sandra James had so much phenobarbital in her she couldn't possibly have driven a car. The prosecution said Ryan forced his wife to drink this second dose of immobilon mixed with orange juice. This, they alleged, explained the abrasion on the inside of her mouth. From the start, Ryan James maintained his wife had killed herself. But the prosecution offered no fewer than 20 witnesses to say that Sandra was a devoted mother and a strong woman who would never take her own life. And there was no need for suicide, they said, because she believed her husband's affair was over.
On New Year's Eve, Sandra was bubbly, happy, positive.
She was bright and cheerful. She wanted to make a new beginning.
Sandra was talking about property, looking forward.
She had her dignity back. She was making the most of things.
So her friends say, I don't know.
What caused her to suddenly change her mind and kill herself, Mr. James?
I was never in a position to be able to ask her.
What happened?
I would like to know.
It didn't happen. That's why you don't know. Because she did not kill herself. And you know that as well as anybody.
No. I know that better than most that she did. She is the only one that knows that I didn't do it.
Ryan James was found guilty of his wife's murder and sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in jail.
You are as evil, selfish, and criminally callous a man as I have ever had to sentence. You used your knowledge and expertise in your career as a vet to put together a calculated and wicked plan to end your wife's life and take her from her children so you could live with a woman you had chosen to replace her. It was not enough that you had to kill her. You had to insult and harm her memory by making it seem she had committed suicide.
Investing Ryan James with such Machiavellian skill was perhaps the only way to make sense of his behaviour. That is, if you believe he killed his wife. Because for a trained medical man, he certainly made a mess of it. He'd tried to kill his wife with phenobarbital. When that failed, he tried immobilon. Then he changed his mind, and then changed his mind again. He'd also tried to inject air into her veins, and failed at that too.
And then, in a final twist to this already complicated tale, the prosecution argued that Ryan James had tried to conceal his botched murder by claiming it was suicide. On the face of it, this convoluted theory seems rather hard to swallow. And in fact, there is new evidence to suggest that suicide is a far more likely explanation than murder.
I've got something I want you to sign, both of you. Oh.
It's clear that the discovery of her husband's affair devastated Sandra to the point where she began to consider death.
Will you witness my will? I don't want Catherine to have anything that's mine.
She made a point of covering the will up whilst we were signing it so that we couldn't read it.
The will asked for all her clothes to be burnt until destroyed, and more significantly, for the car that she owned at that particular time to be given to her brother.
To my brother Stephen and sister-in-law Ellen, I say thank you, and I love you both. Please love my 3 children and keep in touch with them. To my husband David Ryan James, I leave absolutely nothing. I loved you and lost you. I will never forget.
There's some phraseology towards the end of the will which suggests that she had her own death in, if you like, closer contemplation than somebody of her age would normally have when they're writing their will.
And during the week before Christmas, Sandra does seem to have questioned whether she had the will to go on living. She told a number of friends how she was sleeping in front of the fire when a Christmas card fell from the mantelpiece and set alight the rug.
She must have told me that she'd taken the rug outside or something. But she did tell me, and this was strange, that before taking the rug outside, she'd thought, why should she?
If it's the case that there was a fire in the house and she didn't respond with the normal urgency to it and didn't seem to care, then that's certainly consistent with somebody who is at least ambivalent about harm coming to them. And that is consistent, again, with somebody who is in a depressive illness.
Sorry, I didn't get company. Dr. Cleary, I've got to tell you this, Sandra. Like a cup of tea or something? That'd be lovely, thanks.
On Christmas Eve, Ryan insisted a locum doctor visit Sandra because she was anxious about her memory loss. The doctor specifically asked her if she was suicidal, which Sandra denied. Dr. Cleary recorded her mental state and said she was shaky and under great strain. Had he known her full medical history, he might have been even more concerned.
Pointing in the direction of the possibility that she killed herself is, first of all, that her medical notes that I think were available to the court indicated that in the past, quite a number of years ago, in the 70s, she'd been treated with antidepressants and had some symptoms that were depressive symptoms. Now, doctors don't treat or shouldn't treat patients with antidepressants unless they have a depressive illness. Also, people who have shown a tendency to that sort of illness are always prone to that sort of illness, again, particularly under stress. And a major stress for anybody is the loss of a cherished relationship.
Although Sandra's friends said she was optimistic about her marriage after Christmas, she may just have been putting on a front.
Everything's all right. I've got my man back. Ryan and I are going to make a go of things. The other woman's buried.
It was plain to you she was a very proud person.
Yes.
The kind of person who always kept up appearances.
Oh, yes.
Who would pretend things were fine when inside she was in turmoil?
Yes, I'm sure.
I think it's something to do under the saddle, yeah. It's been getting worse every time.
Although Sandra had told her friends she and Ryan were starting again in the new year, it seems likely she knew his affair with Catherine Crooks was continuing. Catherine had stayed in the house while Sandra was away, and Catherine had accompanied Ryan on several veterinary visits. Catherine's former husband has told us she made no attempt to conceal the affair. The future must have weighed heavily on Sandra James. The family house in Tower Road had been sold. She was shortly to lose her home, her status as the vet's wife, and much of her income.
Ruination. All her dreams were in ashes. I do not think that Sandra would have found that at all easy to cope with.
You've been out again without your bloody mobile phone.
Despite Sandra's public optimism, at home it was a very different story. The weekend before she died saw an escalating series of rows. Ryan says she talked of suicide.
If I had a gun, I would end it now. Either one of us or both of us.
What are you going to do now, jump?
No. If I was going to do anything like that, I would have my own ways.
In marked contrast to the prosecution's claim that Ryan was drugging her, he, it seems, was seeking help for her.
At about 11 a.m, Ryan came to see me. He appeared to be desperately worried.
I'm concerned about Sandra. She's having mood swings.
What's happened to your cheek?
Sandra did a couple of days ago.
Come in, Ryan.
I can't say anything to her without her flaring up at me. I mean, the other day I was playing Love Changes Everything on the piano and she went berserk. And I'm worried about her driving. And she refused to see a doctor.
Come in.
In the days before she died, Ryan telephoned Sandra's friends expressing his concerns, telling one that she had access to guns and drugs in his surgery. According to Ryan, there was one particular fight on the Sunday before she died that suggested Sandra was well aware he was still involved with Catherine.
I want to clean out your car to get that woman out of it. I feel dirty every time I sit in it. Give me the car keys. I'm off. I don't know how long I'll be or if I'll be back tonight.
Go on, go on in.
You've got the house, the kids, the car and her. What more do you want? Expect me when you see me. It may not be tonight. Sort out the kids' food. They're your kids now.
Depression as an illness is an illness that's to do with anger, mainly anger turned in on the person, and that's why people who are depressed sometimes kill themselves, but also sometimes intermittently anger turned outwards towards other people. And if I've been instructed by the defence and seen papers that I have seen, I think my advice to the defence would have been that there should be evidence, expert medical evidence presented that suggested a substantially greater than, if you like, normal probability that Mrs. James killed herself.
At the trial, the prosecution relied heavily on the forensic evidence against Ryan James. But there are alternative explanations for the various drugs found in Sandra James's body. We believe they are more consistent with suicide than murder. Take the prosecution's case that Ryan was systematically poisoning Sandra with phenobarbital. The prosecution said Sandra's hair showed two distinct bands representing two periods of phenobarbital poisoning. One band was said to represent the 2 lost days before Christmas. But after Ryan told Sandra of his affair, she was prescribed sleeping pills and antidepressants. One of the world's leading toxicologists thinks these drugs are more likely to have been responsible than phenobarbital.
It's much more likely that the state that was described was due to the sleeping pills that she was taking, the benzodiazepines, because those sleeping pills always cause a loss of memory, where the barbiturates very rarely cause a loss of memory. Drugs do appear in the hair that is underneath the skin and also in the hair that has grown out on top of the skin here. So that indicates that there's been a number of days before death, in the period just before death, when she took phenobarbital. But it doesn't suggest that there were two distinct periods separated by a period where there was no drug taken, because the further out parts of the hair that have drug in them have very small amounts of drug, and that's been shown in studies on drug incorporation into hair that this often occurs, just like that, when drug is excreted in sweat and in oils from the skin and is carried into the hair by that means.
Ryan said that although in the days before she died Sandra was in bed, she was by no means comatose, and when either of them wanted to sleep the phone was unplugged. One of Sandra's friends also admitted she'd advised him to let her sleep. And Ryan said it was not he but Sandra who chose not to call a doctor, perhaps because she was harming herself.
I'm sorry to be a nuisance. Are the children all right?
Yes.
I'm just tired. You won't call a doctor, will you? You won't go on behind my back while I'm asleep, will you?
No.
The prosecution said Sandra had lapsed into unconsciousness because Ryan had given her so much phenobarbital. But our expert says the blood results do not support that.
There are two problems, and one is we don't know what part of the body the blood was taken from. We do know it was taken after death. And any blood after death is suspect because drugs can move and they can then appear to be higher than they actually were at the time of death. The level that was found in her blood was just a little higher than the therapeutic range for phenobarbital. And when people start to take that, they may be sleepy, but most people are able to function. It's often prescribed for people with epilepsy, and they're able to carry on with their life.
Which means Sandra could both have injected and driven herself to the surgery for drugs. The defence pathologist, who also did a post-mortem on Sandra James but didn't appear in court, says the prosecution were wrong to say that only an expert could have done the injections.
I think anybody can recognise a vein. We see them on the back of our hands and on our feet, and these were the sites that were chosen, so that really anybody who wanted to try and inject themselves would have gone for these sites. The fact that only one or two had even entered the vein and most hadn't suggests the opposite. Perhaps they were done by somebody who was unskillful.
Nor did Dr. Ackland believe there was any basis for the prosecution's suggestion that Ryan had tried to kill his wife by injecting air into her veins.
I'm quite sure that had he wanted to inject the air into the veins, he would have been successful, and we would have been able to see what's called air embolus at post-mortem.
The defence suggested Sandra James was practising to inject herself. The complete absence of any drug residue around the injection sites makes this entirely plausible. Had Ryan injected Imobilon and Revivon, as the prosecution claim, these would have left drug traces. Indeed, the prosecution conceded there was no evidence at all for an earlier dose of Imobilon.
There is no scientific justification to say, is there, that the Revivon was preceded by an earlier Imobilon.
I agree. There's no basis. I'm merely working on the what the hell is the Revivon doing there thesis.
Supposing she had taken the Revivon by mistake, is there anything in your findings to prove this cannot have happened?
No, not that I've seen, no.
I think the scientific evidence is that there was a dose of Imobilon. I don't see any evidence for multiple doses. I don't see any evidence that says there couldn't have been multiple doses, but there's no need to postulate that to explain the evidence that's there.
The prosecution said Ryan had forced Sandra to drink a dose of Imobilon because there was bruising on Sandra's upper lip consistent with having had a glass pressed against it.
I didn't feel it was a plausible explanation. I felt that, as I say, there could be many other innocent explanations for this mark. I wasn't even sure that it was done before death. If there had been an attempt to force somebody to drink, then I would have expected more significant bruising, perhaps more to the sides of the upper and lower jaw, where the mouth is trying to force the mouth open.
The defence case was that this was suicide made to look like murder. They argued that Sandra James had cleared away all the evidence of how she'd killed herself. All that remained near her body were tissues with phenobarbital and immobilon traces on them. What is clear is that the prosecution were wrong to claim that Sandra had no access to the drugs which killed her.
Sandra knew her way around the surgery, and she'd passed, obviously, the drugs cupboards on numerous times. So yes, I think she could have easily have got in there. Anybody could have got at them, to be honest with you. When they were delivered in a cardboard box. Some of us could have been so busy that it would have taken hours for us to actually get to them, unpack them, put them on the shelves. So yes, they could have been unattended for a long, long time.
If Sandra James did commit suicide, she might well have mistaken Revivon for Immobilon. Immobilon and Revivon are always packaged together, but the police recovered a box from the surgery containing 2 phials of Immobilon. So, presumably, there was a box containing 2 phials of Revivon, and Sandra James inadvertently took one of these. However, we will never know if she did go to the surgery for the drugs which killed her because of an astonishing omission by the police. Although so much of the case rested on this, we have discovered that neither the surgery nor the dangerous drugs cabinet was ever fingerprinted, an unusual departure from police practice, to say the least.
Generally speaking, in murder inquiries, this usually means a full fingerprint search of the premises concerned and premises which are associated with the inquiry. Because once having done a full fingerprint search, then obviously nothing possibly could be omitted. Certainly, if fingerprints had been found, then obviously this may have led to specific lines of inquiry.
Particularly if they had been Mrs. James's.
Particularly if they'd been Mrs. James's.
Ironically, the more the police evidence from the scene of the crime is examined, the more it seems to help the defence. The prosecution argued Ryan was drugging Sandra with phenobarbital disguised in her antibiotic capsules. But the capsule the police tested didn't contain phenobarbital. A bottle containing the residue of phenobarbital was found among Sandra James's clothes. This suggests she was taking the phenobarbital herself. The prosecution also said Ryan James had a financial motive for killing Sandra and that he was heavily in debt. But this debt was no more than his mortgage. And what about the statement from 80-year-old Connie Blackburn that had led the police to believe Ryan James had gone to the surgery in the early hours of the morning? Connie Blackburn was unable to identify the driver of the car or whether it was a man or a woman. Nor was this the first time she'd heard noises in the night.
She was very absent-minded, and she always kept hearing things during the night, and she was always convinced that there was somebody walking around the back of the surgery, or she heard footsteps coming up the gravel path up to the shed where all the some of the bags were kept.
The prosecution's theory that Sandra's murder was intricately plotted by Ryan seems to have just been accepted by a small-town community.
They were convinced he was guilty. There was a hardening of the attitude. And if one had a different opinion, one was on the outside. One wasn't allowed to have a different opinion. It was like a club, a clique, and they all joined together. One prosecution witness did ring me up and sought to convince me otherwise when she knew I was appearing for the defence. She spoke at length about photographs of Sandra's mouth, where there were deep indentations in her lips where a glass had, she said, been forced against Sandra's mouth so that Sandra had been made to drink. And she said that convinced her that Ryan was guilty, and she used it to seek to convince me that Ryan was guilty, and told me to think about it very hard.
Ryan James' appeal was turned down in March this year. It seemed to be the end of the road. At 41, he faced a minimum of 20 years in jail, and there seemed little prospect of that changing. There was only one other person who knew for sure what had happened in the early hours of the 13th of January 1994, and she was dead. But shortly afterwards, Catherine Crooks, who'd married Ryan in jail and was now living in his house in Tower Road, made an astonishing discovery.
Aren't you going to pay me? Hiya, Graham. I didn't know you were back from university.
Yeah, thank God.
Help yourself to a cup of tea.
I will. Hi, kids.
Ryan's just called. He's had a letter from the veterinary college saying there is going to be a disciplinary hearing. Looks like a foregone conclusion they'll strike him off. Yeah. He asked me to start getting rid of his stuff.
Do you want to...
No, I'm fine, thank you. Oh, my God. Graham. Ryan, I leave you absolutely nothing but this note. If you find it in time, Sam.
Sam? Who's Sam?
Well, it's Sandra's handwriting.
Sam was Sandra James's nickname. The note was hidden in the equine section of the veterinary magazine that was current in January 1994, the month that Sandra died.
If a note is written in a way that sounds as if it's signing off, and if it's put in a place where it won't be found probably for some time, that points in the direction of it being a note that's connected with an intention to kill oneself, particularly if it was put in a place where, for example, her husband wouldn't have found it for some time, but would almost certainly have eventually found it, because that he would have opened a particular book at some stage, then that would be a not uncommon way to do it if you were intending to harm yourself.
The note was ESDA tested. Impressions on the paper were from telephone messages taken by Sandra up to the 4th of January 1994. So the note must have been written around the last week of her life. And comparisons with other known examples of her handwriting leave no doubt she wrote it. The note alone demands that the case be reopened. We believe the evidence suggests Ryan James did not kill his wife, and that had the police conducted a more thorough inquiry, this might have been apparent sooner. Because the police never found the immobilin files that killed Sandra James or the syringe, these were never tested for fingerprints. Despite receiving a commendation for this inquiry, the police never searched the black rubbish bags by the gate. They also failed to fingerprint a large number of syringes. Instead, these were destroyed. This extraordinary omission adds credibility to the question first raised by Ryan James's lawyers at trial. Did Sandra James hide the syringe and the files to make her own suicide look like murder? Now that the suicide note has been discovered, this question is even more relevant. As for Ryan James, he has served 3 years of a life sentence. He has lost his liberty and his professional reputation. Rough Justice believes he deserves the chance of restoring both, with a new hearing before the Court of Appeal.
Sandra was portrayed to be something of a saint, whereas in reality she was as fallible as you and I. Ryan was portrayed as the Demon King, and in reality he's just another man, just like any other man. But just because he was awful to her didn't make him a murderer.
If you have a criminal issue you'd like to discuss with the Rough Justice team, the address to write to is room 5362, BBC White City, 201 Wood Lane, London, W12 7TS.